Very good. Well, welcome. Good evening. I guess we should go ahead and get started up at this point. Appreciate you all being here. Rather lengthy discussion we had on the LAUSD's affordable housing issue that was coming up tonight. Appreciate you all being here for this evening, and that's kind of where everybody out, I believe, at this point. We appreciate everybody coming in and hanging in there with us. Just to give you a heads up on where we're going to go tonight, we're waiting for Jesse to come online with us for this evening. I don't see him online yet, but hopefully he'll be on soon.
I'm here. I'm here, John.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, Jesse. I missed you there as we came into it. Good.
Well, no worries.
We're going to go through and just do a call to order, do a pledge of allegiance, if we will. Go through a couple of protocol things here with it. We are going to be electing officers and board members this evening. And Jesse, we're going to get to discussions with you. Give you a heads up. There was a rather lengthy discussion on the affordable housing from LA Unified School District. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that or not, but it was rather extensive and detailed. And there'll be some questions that'll be coming to you either by me or by some of the others concerning the legislation of AB 3308 and a couple of issues on that. I'll give you a heads up too. There was a question to me that came up that I want to make sure that give you a chance to look at before we actually get things started, which will have to do with your wife being an attorney who handles the low income stuff and the conflict things and what you're doing to make sure that doesn't happen. I want you to be able to get rid of that so nobody ends up using that at a later point in time. We don't need to get distracted by things. But anyway, let me go ahead and call the meeting to order at this point in time. Like to go ahead and go to a pledge of allegiance at this stage, if we may. And Jesse, since we got you on, would you mind go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I'd be honored. Thank you. Please join me in saluting our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jesse, thank you for that. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
As far as the protocol is concerned for this evening, if you would, we have a number of the board members that are going to be as part of the panelists on here, mainly so that they can monitor some of the questions on things. If you have questions, two ways of going about it. One is to put them in the Q&As down at the bottom of your screen. You see a Q&A, tap on that and go ahead and punch it in. Aaron will be monitoring those to pull up those particular questions. And the other methodology to it, which we can try and hopefully we can get to, is if you go down to where it says participants and you tap onto that, you can raise your hand over the right-hand side, just as Maria has just done now, and as others do as well. Put your hand up and we'll see if we can get to you. That's our intent. Please forgive me. This is all new technology and what have you. We're struggling with that from time to time, but we hope that it's going to improve as we go along. A couple of things too, emails. We definitely need your emails. Go over and if you find that you're in need of this information, please go over to our website, WHHO.com. You'll find a place there where you can give us your emails to that so we can make sure that you're up to date on things. Please consider being a member. It's only $25 per household per year. We need your support in that regard as well. Newsletters have gone out. Please be aware that the advertisers that help us, please help them, mention them and let them know that they're around. Our next meeting, January the 20th, we have invited Bob Bloomingfield to come and speak with us about the state of the valley. Obviously, there's a lot of issues going on with the homelessness and other things too. So we'll be happy to talk with Bob on that evening, and we hope that he will come back to us on January. He usually does. Dennis, I hope that you're up. The next item for business is for us to go to the election of officers. Dennis, if you would take the floor and give the slate of officers and board members at this point. And as the chair, I find by the number of people that I see and individuals from the board, we do have a sufficient number to be able to be a quorum for that particular purpose. Dennis, are you able to communicate with us? Dennis, go ahead. You should be able to talk. Go ahead. You need to unmute yourself.
Yep, I just did.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. As chairperson of the nominating committee for the 2021 WHO officers and directors, I am pleased to announce the committee hereby nominates the following: Returning members for the 2021 officers: John M. Walker, President; Dennis DiBiase, yours truly, Executive Vice President; Martin Lipkin, Executive Vice President; Sylvia Anthony Murley, Treasurer; Nancy Porter, Secretary. In addition, we nominate the following returning members as 2021 Directors at Large: Armin Hovnasian, Aaron Williams, and Shelley Schwartz. We also nominate 2 new members to the board. We're pleased to do that. Through their previous community activism, they've shown the work of WHO and to our outreach to the community. The proposed new members are Bobby Wasserman and Ari Coyne. We also want to note that there's 2 founding members that are stepping down, and we are proposing their titles to be revised to emeritus members: Shirley Blessing and Pat Patton. These 2 members have contributed to the work of WHO and the community at large for many decades, and we want to express our sincere gratitude for their service. John, these are the proposed nominees for the 2021 officers and directors.
Those are placed before the membership at this point as a slate. I think that because of the way that we have it now, unless there's any objection by raise of a hand, that will be the order of those being elected. Do we see any hands raised in objection to that? Seeing no hands that are raised in objection to that of members, that's a slate that's is appointed. Next order of business is basically a background on a few things. We have update for you on the promenade. As you may know, that the promenade has been going through all kinds of appeals and what have you. Just had one recently with the LA City Council Plum meeting. Committee. The appeals were denied at that point. I believe it will now probably move on to the City Council for a final vote at that stage, and we'll see how that turns out. But otherwise, that should end up working. As you may know, that our organization had worked very hard with them, probably spent at least 100 hours worth of time with them, with all of their experts, have come up with a separate contract with them that will run with the land. That's going to give us greater protections than what even they're going to be able to get from the City Council at that point. So we'll see how that's going to go. Homelessness, Judge Carter has been working on that rather extensively. Bob Bloomingfield has proposed a city ordinance on that is interesting, that we hope is going to be able to do something to try to give some teeth to the city to be able to get the homeless situation taken care of in a very compassionate type of fashion. We're in support of that at this particular point. So we'll see what happens with that. Legislation. So we begin to come now to Jesse on some stuff. There's been a lot of legislation that's been going on up in Sacramento. Legislature is opening back up. I think it is on December the 7th, which is coming up Monday from now. As they open back up, there's going to be a great deal of information that's going to be going on and effects on other bills coming back up. Most of you know that SB 1120 failed last time around. It was an attempt by the state legislature to take over the local control from us on what's going to go on with legislation. And as a result of that, we've been fighting that dramatically. A number of other organizations too, and that was eventually defeated. We noticed that Jesse did not vote on that particular one. He did an NVR on that. He gets a chance to explain that. But for practical purposes, an NVR vote is the same thing as a no vote on it. It's just that there's not a registration of either being an up or a down on it. Those are tactical decisions that are made, and Jesse can certainly make an explanation of that. The major focus, I think, is going to be also tonight on AB 3308, which is a bill that was proposed by Jesse and was passed. And that was part of the discussion tonight with the LA Unified School District proposing housing on some of the school district properties. So we'll go into that in quite a bit of detail. But I think, first of all, we'd like to first thank our Assembly member for joining us. It is always good to see you and to see the work that you're doing. And I think, first of all, we'd like to find out about Sacramento from you, what you think about it, what's been going on, what you expect to have happen up there when you get there. If there's anything that you can imagine that's going to help us here, or things that we're going to need to watch that we're going to get ourselves into into some kind of problems with. So Assemblyman Jesse Gabriel, the floor is yours, sir, and welcome to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for the invitation, and to the entire board, and to Dennis, who I miss seeing on Southwest flights up and down between Sacramento, and all of you for the opportunity to speak to you, and thanks to everybody that I can't see for your engagement. And just wanted to say at the beginning, congrats to the old slate of directors and officers, and the new folks as well. And thank you for the service that you provide to our community. It's certainly important, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you a little bit. With your permission, John, I'll be relatively brief, or at least I'll try to be in my comments, and then open it up to questions. Certainly want to do listening if folks have things that they want to share with me, or questions. I would love to turn this into a dialogue. So maybe I'll talk for just a minute about this past legislative session, a little bit of what I think is going to happen going forward, and then maybe address SB 1120 and my bill as well, since those seem to be topics of interest. So, I'll start by saying I'm 2 years into this, a little over 2 years into my career in public service. It's certainly interesting to peek behind the curtain and see how laws get made in Sacramento. It's been a great learning experience. I'm proud of the work that my team and I have been able to do. This year was an extraordinarily challenging year, obviously. With the COVID-19 pandemic. And the way that I like to describe it to people is it wasn't just one crisis, it was multiple overlapping crises. So obviously there's the extraordinary public health crisis, which we're still facing. That morphed itself into a severe economic crisis. We lost more jobs in the state of California in the first 2 months after the stay at home, twice as many as we did during 26 months during the Great Recession. So we lost twice as many jobs in 2 months as we did in 26 months during the Great Recession. That obviously led to a severe budget crisis. So the state went from a $6 billion projected surplus to a $54 billion projected deficit. And so a lot of our work, unfortunately in Sacramento, has been the relatively difficult and unfun and challenging work of trying to make our budget balance without cutting core and essential services that folks depend on. As many of you know, unlike the federal government, which can deficit spend, we are required to balance our budget in the state of California. And so we had record reserves set away, about $20 billion that were projected to help us through a moderate economic downturn, but nobody projected anything of this significance. We also had some challenges, just frankly, in conducting our business. The interpretation that we got from our attorneys is that the California Constitution requires us to meet and conduct business in person in Sacramento. So when the pandemic first came, we, at the advice of public health officials, left Sacramento to return to our districts to try to help flatten the curve. We then went back into session a few weeks later. Unfortunately, had a COVID outbreak in the legislature. A number of my colleagues ended up have COVID. One, Tom Lackey, a retired CHP officer who represents a district in northern LA County, actually ended up in the hospital. Thank God he is doing okay. But that required us to go back out of session for a few weeks to quarantine. We then came back for what I think most people would describe as a very difficult end of session. We were all spread out as far as possible in the room and masked and trying to do our business, but it was challenging just given the physical constraints and limitations to be able to do things. So I think there was a lot of work that unfortunately didn't get done last year. I was disappointed by a lot that wasn't able to be done, but it was just a very challenging year. And unfortunately, a lot of things require resources. And when you're trying to, protect and defend programs against a, $54 billion deficit, when you have a roughly $200 billion budget, that's a tall order. As John mentioned, we're going back up on Monday. Will be the swearing in for the new legislature, I actually don't know exactly what to predict. Traditionally the way that it works is we get sworn in at the beginning of December, and then everybody goes home for the month of December to work on preparing their legislative agenda, and then come January we start to move bills through the legislative process. I think the big outstanding questions for all of us are, how and under what circumstances will we be able to meet? Will we be able to meet in person spread out? We will be doing some of the remote testimony. They gave us the indication later that some witnesses could testify remotely. How frequently will we be meeting given the pandemic? I think there are some open questions about that. And then also, what are the state's financial circumstances going to be? One of the biggest questions for us is, will there be any additional relief from Washington, D.C.? For those of you that have been following debate in Washington, you know that one of the big sticking points in negotiations right now is the amount of relief to state and federal governments. And so obviously, if there were to be some kind of economic stimulus from Washington, D.C., that could change the circumstances of the state and hopefully help us to avoid some cuts and deliver some services that we need to do. I think, a lot of our work will continue to focus on COVID, on the public health response to COVID, on supporting our small businesses, which have absolutely been devastated, to try to help folks who are impacted by COVID and their, the loss of jobs, folks who are struggling to hold on to their homes, folks who are, struggling in very difficult times, and then obviously also issues related to safely distributing a vaccine, which I think a lot of our public health folks are very optimistic about, and hopefully reopening our schools soon and regaining some sense of normalcy. So it's a really a challenging and unprecedented time. I hesitate to make strong predictions other than there's some really big challenges ahead of us, and we're going to continue to work on them. Now, again, what I tell people, all of these crises, the public health crisis, the economic crisis, the budget crisis, all of that is layered on top of all of the pre-existing issues that we face going into this in the state. So, obviously the severe wildfires that we continue to have in the state, and that'll be an issue of concern and something that I and my colleagues in the legislature will work on. And then also housing and homelessness. I think that continues to be a very significant challenge. The last homeless count that we got from the County of Los Angeles told us that we had 66,000 unsheltered people in the County of Los Angeles, and this was pre-COVID. And that is a 12% increase over the prior year in the county and a 16% increase over the prior year in the city of Los Angeles. So part of what I can talk about in a little bit, and for those of you that are curious about the dynamic in Sacramento, there is extraordinary frustration in the legislature about the lack of progress on the homelessness issue. Myself and many others, and as you know, the cities and the counties are the front line on that. But I think people are really feeling like they failed to get the job done there, and that the status quo isn't working, and that we need to do some more to address those issues. And I think most folks that I talk to in the West San Fernando Valley would agree that we're just not getting the job done on homelessness. And so I think that part of what is motivating the legislature to get more involved in these issues is they don't feel like cities and counties are getting the job done, and that we need to make some changes, and we need to do some more some more thoughtful things to address homelessness. I had a bill this past year. I had 4 bills that made it through the process to the governor's desk. 3 of them were signed into law. He vetoed one of them, which really leaves me scratching my head. It was a bill that passed with unanimous bipartisan support to require more accountability around state homeless funding. It was supported by 20 bipartisan co-authors, including the Republican leader, including very progressive Democrats, everyone across the political spectrum who said, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on homelessness. We need more accountability and more oversight and more data about what is working and what is a good use of taxpayer money and what is going to help people get off the streets and help address this issue. And I was very disappointed that the governor decided to veto that bill. But I am very much committed to continuing to work on that issue. I think that we need more accountability and more oversight with respect to that.
Jesse, if I may, on that particular issue alone, I was reading that there's a state auditor just released an audit that slams the state officials from 2012 to 2017 that they blew $2.7 billion in funds that could have been used for affordable housing, but weren't spent by the required deadlines. Is that the type of stuff you're talking about?
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that we were auditing, both local governments and the state government and recipients of funds. And one of the questions was, how much funding do you have? What have you spent it on? How many people has it helped? What are the results? And it was really a head scratcher for me. There's an article in the Daily News that you might read about that bill, about the veto, because I think there were a lot of observers of Sacramento who were confused about why it was vetoed. And some of you have probably seen Controller Galprin's audits, right? I mean, I meet a lot of folks in the Valley who say, look, I voted twice to tax myself. I said to government, take more of my money, whether it was, Measure H or Proposition HHH. and do something about homelessness. And yet they look at these audits where very little is being done, where they're spending $850,000 a door to put up units of affordable housing, and they're disgusted. And they said, this is not the right answer to this problem. So, you know, I think step one is getting a little more accountability and transparency around this, and hopefully doing a little bit more data-driven policy making so that we can really address this issue.
Did you talk to the governor and find out why he vetoed that? I mean, it had support from both sides of the aisle, and he vetoed it. Why? Did you talk to him? Did he say why he was going to veto that? I mean,
he put out a veto message, and he said that he's, you know, already he wants to work on these issues with the legislature, and that there are already some reporting requirements in place. But I actually, you know, I asked for a meeting, and I met with his top housing advisor and homelessness advisor, and said, look, I'm not going to give up. We're going to continue to work on this issue. You saw that there was unanimous support for this in the legislature, and so, you know, we intend to continue to press that issue.
But that brings, I guess, to what bills do you plan on proposing this next legislature that's going to have your stamp on it? And are you going to do some reach out to the community before you start looking at those bills? And again, I say that because the 3308, we didn't hear anything about from you at all. And I know you said there was outreach to the community, but I know I didn't see any, and I don't think any of our board members saw any of that outreach. What are you planning on bills for this next coming legislature? And what are you going to do as far as any outreach to the community concerning them?
Yeah, and maybe, John, with your permission, I'm happy to talk about that, and then maybe I ought to talk about 1120 and 3308. I think that way might be helpful. You know, look, we take meetings with an extraordinarily broad cross-section of folks in the community. People are pitching us legislative ideas all the time, some that we think are good, some that we decide for various reasons aren't the right idea to run with. You know, I meet with literally hundreds of people in the Valley who have all different kinds of opinions and ideas, and we are very solicitous of community feedback. I get from my team a memo every single week that details for me every call and email and message we've gotten on our website from the community about every single bill. And so it can tell me, and I read it on the plane home when I was flying every Thursday afternoon. You know, this is how many people called in about this issue. This is how many people wrote in response to that issue. I can tell you for every person in the Valley who feels very strongly that A is the best policy ever, there's another person who feels very strongly that A is the worst. So, you know, there's certainly a diversity of opinion among the nearly 500,000 folks that I represent, but I try very, very hard to listen and to be thoughtful about these issues. And, you know, the question of what we're going to introduce, I've been had a legislative meeting with my team today. We're continuing to work. I think we're still developing our legislative package. Part of it will depend on the state's financial situation. Part of it will depend on you know, what happens between now and January and February when the deadline comes up to introduce bills. I think we will continue to probably look at some of the issues that I've worked on, hate crimes, housing and homelessness, gun violence, issues of higher education. Very proud to represent CSUN and Northridge. And then, of course, issues related to COVID, which I think will be important to us. So very much in development. But if you have ideas or thoughts or feedback, certainly very much welcome those. So a couple of things, I guess, just to mention on SB 1120, which you mentioned that I abstained on, just to as you very correctly noted, all that matters in Sacramento is whether you vote for a bill. So most bills require majority support. So in the legislature and the assembly, you need 41 votes for a bill to advance. And that's irrespective of how many people are there. So an abstention in Sacramento is considered a polite no. That's sort of how it's described. And as far as I could tell in my first couple years in office, I think I may have only voted no on 3 or 4 bills. Because my perspective on this is, you learn very quickly, is that you are one of 120 members of the legislature, and your ability to get things done for your community depends on being able to work with other folks. And people often feel very strongly about their bills, and so I try to be very polite and courteous. I know that my colleagues work hard on their bills, and so if I disagree with them, I will often tell them ahead of time. I'll say, listen, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I don't think that is the right solution for my community, or I don't think that works for the state. And so I'm going to respectfully abstain from your bill. And so that's what I did in the case of 1120. I agree with you know, some of the concerns that were raised about the balance between local control and state involvement. I heard from a lot of folks in the Valley about that bill, some who were passionately for it, some who were passionately opposed. I ultimately decided it was a little bit farther than I thought was right to go. And so notwithstanding the fact that it was the Senate President Pro Tem's bill, I decided to respectfully abstain from that bill. So
that brings us to another issue too, about working with the block that's up there. You know, Wiener has put together a pretty strong block on things and seems to be almost dealing by threats to the legislative members to get them to vote for certain things. It doesn't seem like it's anything other than a pretty hostile environment up there. If you're not going to go with what Northern California wants, you're going to get hammered. Is that your impression? Is that your feeling for what's up there?
Well, Paul, I mean, it's, you know, there's certainly some big personalities up there and people who push really hard. I can tell you that Scott and I have gotten into some very fierce disagreements about housing policy, and he and I see some things the same and see some things very, very differently. But I actually think that there's a huge amount of control and power that's being exercised by Southern California. You know, his signature bill, SB 50, couldn't even get out of the state Senate. And it's very unusual for a bill to not get out of what you call its first house, right? I mean, oftentimes members will extend a courtesy to a member in their house and they say, oh, well, I'll wait to see how the bill develops through the legislative process. But he couldn't even get that bill out of his own house. And the way it was described by the Los Angeles Times was that it ran into the brick wall of LA County. And I think that there were a lot of folks in the Valley, certainly me, you know, I didn't have a chance to vote on it because it didn't get to the assembly. But a lot of folks like Senator Hertzberg and others who viciously, you know, who really stood up and you know, vocally opposed that bill and explained why it doesn't work for our community and a lot of other communities in LA County. So yeah, certainly there are folks in San Francisco and other parts of the state who may see the world a little differently than we do. But I think that we're an important voice. We had a meeting today with the LA County delegation to talk about some of these issues. Housing and homelessness was and always is at the top of our agenda. I think it's the issue that all of us hear the most about from our constituents, that we hear the most frustration about from our constituents. But you know, my perspective is if we're going to do good and important things on housing, that LA County has to be part of the conversation. You know, right now the two housing committees are chaired by Assemblymember Chu from San Francisco and Senator Wiener from San Francisco, and we think that there needs to be a stronger voice from Southern California in the conversation, and that's going to lead to better policy that I think works for folks in LA County and works for the state more broadly.
Is that something that the coalition is working on now to try to get that changed so that you've got more of a voice in the housing committees? Yes, we are. And actually one of the, you know, the LA County coalition or delegation is sort of newly reinvigorated. So the Bay Area, the Bay Area caucus has always been very strong. They work together very well. As I understand it, there was sort of an LA County delegation before I was elected. It then kind of went dormant. But about 2 years ago was sort of revived. And so we've been working and actually made some good progress our first year. Also in the budget, right? I mean, I think that Northern California does better than we do in the budget often. And so we were, you know, trying to think about how we might work together and use some of the numbers that we have to bring more resources and transportation dollars and state funding down to Southern California. I certainly worry about that, very particularly for our community. I think when folks think about Los Angeles, they're not thinking about the San Fernando Valley. They're thinking about downtown LA and the West Side. And so, you know, I think part of my job is to make sure that more resources come to the Valley. So I'm eager to, you know, coordinate with our representatives from other parts of the Valley to make sure that we're getting our fair share. So I want to touch on 3308, and again, we're going to jump around in a little bit of stuff, and I'm sure then we're going to open up to the questions, and I'm sure they'll be going back on some of these things we've already covered, but to get some things that are there. 3308 was interesting, and the first thing that struck me was that we didn't hear anything really about it from your office until it came up, and we understand that that's an outreach issue, and hopefully that stuff will be corrected for the future. But originally the bill, I think that most of the people who've been following this understand that the bill initially was just going to be for teachers and for employees of the school district. Then it got opened up and amended to be any public employees. And then it got amended to where it was anybody from the public. What happened with that, and what was your intention with that, and why was it opened up to basically everybody? I mean, obviously the fear is that it's going to be utilized because of the homelessness issue, because of the need for additional homes, that basically that LA Unified School District is just going to go into the apartment business. Now we understand obviously that can't be, but that's sort of, if you will, a broad stroke of that. What say you as to what the intent was of that bill, and why did it get it watered down?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the bill did change, as you aptly note, and that's you know, part of the legislative process. So let me give you a little bit about the bill and then a little bit of the legislative history here. So there was a law passed in 2016, the Teacher Housing Act, recognizing that there's a lack of affordable housing for teachers. It's become a big issue for a lot of school districts around the state in recruiting and retaining teachers. A lot of them are having trouble retaining teachers, and some of you may have seen there was actually an article in the LA Times profiling some students who are studying to become teachers at CSUN and the challenges they face, and how folks who work as teachers in LA sometimes have to live 2 hours away in the Inland Empire or other places. And so, all of the negative, all of the negative externalities that has on the community and their inability to coach sports or, supervise debate club or be there with their students or be, part of their community. So what has happened is there was a series of conflicting opinions from TCAC, the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, as to whether school districts could utilize the low-income housing tax credit. This is a bipartisan federal tax credit that has been existed for a long time, that has proven very useful in developing affordable housing. The state has created its own state tax credit. And these conflicting opinions, at first the administration said you couldn't, and then the most recent opinion in March of this year said you could. But the confusion about that, sort of the state going back and forth, had created some uncertainty. And so the idea was, rather than slowing down the financing of affordable housing, which we desperately need in the state, that the legislature should clarify its intent from the 2016 bill so that people could timely utilize that credit. And so this bill, which was a very modest proposal, just said, we are the most recent TCAC interpretation, the one currently in existence, is what the legislature intended, and that school districts can utilize the credit and restrict their properties to teachers. The issue here is that school districts don't want to be in the business of building housing. They have no interest in building housing for the public. And so their only interest in doing it is if they can have housing for their teachers, because that will help them retain their educational workforce. And so that's an important incentive. So we introduced this bill. It was, and I think largely it still is very, very was perceived in Sacramento as very non-controversial. It was not considered to be a zoning bill. There was no issue raised about local control. It was simply a housing finance bill. It passed through the legislature with overwhelming bipartisan support. The vote was 73-1 in the Assembly, 35-2 in the Senate. Anything that's remotely controversial does not get those type of overwhelming majority support in both houses. Other than the letter of opposition that you guys sent in, and I know John, you and Shelley were very courteous in having a conversation with me about it. There was zero opposition from any interest group or any community to this bill from anywhere in the state. And none of the organizations that are fierce proponents of local control weighed in on the bill. Livable California did not oppose the bill. The California League of Cities did not oppose the bill. The Urban Counties Association did not oppose the bill. The Rural Counties Association. So, everybody saw this as a very modest clarification of state law that would allow us to unlock some federal dollars and some financing for affordable housing.
Here's one of the problems we had, though, that we jumped on because, as you well know, the OSO school property over there is vacant. It's a prime location for them to do something with that particular property. We need it for a school in the future here because of what we're doing out in the Winter Center area. And that's different than what you might find from somebody's concern in Northern California. We get it right in our backyard to where we need something for the kids, and that the housing is not it. The teachers can be potentially put some other location to it, but we got that property now that's on a list that's creating difficulties for us. And there's one other thing that's causing some difficulties here too. It has to do with the exchange issue. I don't find any place in any of the bills that permit a property exchange to be permitted under these particular bills. Was that your intent, for there to be the abilities to exchange properties between developers so that they can have things back and forth? That, to me, that doesn't seem like that was something that was intended. But now, now they're talking about it.
Yeah, so this bill doesn't touch that issue at all. And I just, if I might, John, just want to finish a few things about the bill and then also answer your prior question about sort of why it changed. So, the bill had pretty broad support. It had support from affordable housing organizations, from organizations that support teachers. It had, as some of you will note if you go online, the Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association, which I hear from very frequently about issues of local control, wrote in support of the bill. I have a letter from them here, that they represent thousands of politically active families in the San Fernando Valley, and they commend me for introducing this legislation. So it had, I think some of the opposition that I've heard from folks about local control, I would respectfully submit is misplaced, because all of the usual suspects who are very fiercely determined to protect local control, there was no opposition from any of them. There really wasn't. So why?
Except for us now, we're still here. So don't discount our voice on it because it's in our backyard. We were obviously opposed to it because of that particular problem. We need some schools out here, not housing on school property. School property is best used for education, not for housing. That's what we put our tax monies into. That's when you come back to us periodically from the legislature, say, give us more money so we can build more facilities and do more renovation. And we do it and we do it and we do it. And then all of a sudden they turn around and say, well, we're going to trade this property off, or we're not going to build stuff, or put houses on it instead, when we have decided to go high density out here and we need a school to come out here to attract new people in. People don't want to come in here. They're going to move to Calabasas. If young people in your age bracket say, listen, I want to come and move into some place that's going to be new. Where are you going to move? You're going to move in here in Woodland Hills when there's no schools here for you to take your kids to, as opposed to Calabasas where there are. Westfield would love to have that around too, to be able to attract those young new people coming into and revitalize this particular community. This strikes at the heart of that and kills that. This is the problem where we're coming to say, listen, this is not helpful to us here. And we need to have some help from you to make sure that we're going to be able to have those schools develop that we have out here. Keeping those fees out here, for example, I don't know how many millions of dollars we have right now, something that to build schools with, and it's not being utilized for that. So when you say that it's got all the support that you've got going on, yeah, except for some people that right in their backyard, it's going to kill something that we really need to have developing. So please don't discount our opposition. It has nothing to do with saying we need housing, or there might be some places in the city or other places in the state that it might be appropriate. It's just not appropriate here. It's not working. We need schools.
Yeah, John, please, my apologies. Of course, I would never discount your opinion, and deeply honored to represent your community, and very much appreciated the engagement and conversation that I had with you and Shelley. I think all I was hoping to suggest was the legislation addresses a different issue. It doesn't address some of the things that you've mentioned. Now, what I will say, and I do want to just explain why the legislation changed, as you noted. And then we can talk a little bit about the schools, because I did, recognizing this meeting was coming up, call and have a conversation with board member Melvoin to try to understand what was going on. And I said, is there something going on here that I don't know about? Is there some plan here that I haven't been informed about? And, he assured me that there wasn't. And actually what he said to me, and he said that I could publicly say this, was that he thinks it's extraordinarily unlikely that any housing will be built on those properties, on those 3 properties, and that anything that is done with those properties, he committed to me, really several times would have a very robust community engagement process and would have the community's voice, listened to in that process. Now, again, I don't control whether or not new schools are built. That is something that local districts do. Under state law, and we respect that local control. I don't think that the legislature should be telling individual school districts whether or not they should build. I do believe in local control and that local districts know better. But I did want to call the board member and understand if there was
your pressure on him would be very, very helpful. And him, all they can do is pull it off the list. Pull those schools off the list, because they're used for something else. They shouldn't even be on that list. It's causing us to be really nervous about that. And it makes us have to watch that like a hawk when there's other things we should be doing, very frankly. Pull them off the list. And you're talking to Nick to have him do that.
What he said to me is, he said, and I think he conceded that something had happened with, they were put on an agenda late or whatever, or some way it was inappropriate, that he felt was inappropriate, and I think had sparked some concerns. And I called him. I said, I'm hearing from folks in the community about this. Is there something going on that I don't know about? And he said there isn't. So, you have my commitment that I will continue to engage with him. But again, I do because I do believe in local control. I feel confident saying some things to him, but other things I think are, appropriately left to local decision makers. So in terms of your question about why the bill changed, there was a similar bill that was introduced. If you look at the bill, you notice it's a bill by Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel and Assemblymember Kevin Mullen, who represents Northern California, a city in South San Francisco. He had introduced a similar bill. His cities and his community near Silicon Valley are actually having trouble recruiting police and firefighters because housing is so expensive in their city that they're having trouble filling their police force and their fire force because folks who are firefighters and cops can't afford to live in their communities. And so they actually had some projects that they were working on to build some affordable housing for when they're talking about public employees. What they mean is police officers and firefighters. And so because of all of the problems with COVID and our limitations, the chair of the housing committee came to me and said, your two bills are very similar. We have a limit on the number of bills we can hear for public safety, for public health reasons. We'd prefer to be meeting in person in a small committee room for as short as period as possible. Do you mind if we sort of merge these bills together? And both the assembly member and I agreed that they were sort of getting at similar things, and that we should do it. And the city of Redwood City really pushed. They said, we are having real issues with this. This is important to our public safety, to having a fire department that's fully staffed, and so we need to move forward with this. We ultimately got to the governor, and the governor said, and we had a little bit of a fight with him. The folks from his office said, well, we need to put something in at the very end that says, there could be priority for teachers, and then the city could also, and then you could also secondarily have priority for firefighters and police officers. But we want something at the end that said, if it's not fully filled, that there's the possibility that members of the public could go in there, because we believe that otherwise the bill would violate the Fair Housing Act and other federal regulations. And so there was a robust conversation back and forth. We ultimately agreed to add in that language at the very last minute. I think the consensus from a lot of folks is that was sort of a hat tip to something that was very, very unlikely to come about. So that is why the bill changed through the legislative process.
All right, very good. I appreciate that. And one of the things that's also causing some concern, let me get to open up to questions here. The tax credit issue, the federal tax credit issue, I think has raised an issue that was showing up tonight that we really hadn't appreciated. That when people get into these particular locations that are indeed school teachers or school employees, and then all of a sudden they change and they're no longer employed by that, they can't get them out. And I think the facts were showing something like 56% of the present existing housing is all they have occupied by those that are employed by the school district. The rest of them are just there because they've changed positions. There's nothing in the legislation that indicates that there's abilities to get rid of them. And secondly, I'm wondering now, because of the federal tax credits, whether or not there's a restriction if you're going after the federal tax credits to where indeed you can't throw them out. And that creates problems. You end up with people that's really not the intent of what the bill is all about. Do you know anything about that at all? And what do you plan to do with that?
I will confess, Sean, I'm not an expert in that, but my understanding of this is that the way that this would operate is as you would with a normal lease, right? So the teacher would go in and they would get a 1-year lease from the building operated by, the school district. And then at the end of the term, they would look to renew their lease and, or it's a 2-year lease or whatever the landlord and tenant agree with. So if they have switched jobs at the end of the term of the lease, then the school district would be within their rights to not renew their lease.
Yeah, by the way, that's something that's interesting. The comments are being made tonight by the board representative is that the school district does not want to be in the business of being a landlord. In fact, it's going to go over to whoever the developer is. The only thing that LA Unified is going to get out of that is going to be the initial lease of the property figure, and whatever comes in as far as the monthly rentals and what have you goes to the company that does the building and does the leasing. So they're not going to see anything with that. The LA Unified School District is not going to be a participant in that particular process. They don't want to be. That's not what they want to end up doing. They just want to lease the property and let somebody else build it and take care of it and do stuff. That seems to, again, to be counterproductive of what the whole purpose of the bill is all about. So I wonder if there needs to be some tweaking of this to see if we can't make it better and give some more local control to the school district where they can really make this thing work.
Yeah, I mean, I have not heard that particular concern. I'm certainly willing to talk to them about it. What I have heard from the school districts that is consistent with what you're saying is that they really have no interest. I mean, they're in the business of educating children. They don't want to be building and running affordable housing, but they sort of feel like they're out of options. And a lot of them, again, this has really become a huge teacher retention issue for school districts around the state, the lack of affordable housing. And so they sort of feel like they have to. I think it would be very unwise for them and counterproductive to their purposes to set up an arrangement where non-employees of the district, non-teachers are occupying that housing, because then they haven't advanced their purpose. Their purpose is to house their employees so that they can, so that they can retain them. So I would hope that local school districts would be smart enough to structure these arrangements in a way that they would advance what they are coming to the legislature and telling us is their goals, as opposed to something that would be counterproductive to their mission.
Well, two more things, and then indeed I am going to shut up for change here. And I hear everybody applauding the background of that one. First, that there's this concept, if you will, of affordable housing for teachers. because this has to be low income, the teachers can't qualify for this. And this whole concept of going, it's just great for the teachers, great for the teachers. That is sort of, a carrot that's being held out there to us that's not really practical. There may be other employees, there may be janitors and other persons that are making lower income wages that indeed need to be there. But as far as attracting good teachers into an area, that carrot that's being dangled there seems to be a false assumption of what's going on. What say you to that?
Yeah, look, this is going to depend by region of the state, the way that the tax credit operates. And again, I'm not an expert in it, but it's folks who make up to 80% of area median income. And in some places, in many communities around the state, including communities that many of us live in, that can be a relatively high figure. And so folks, new teachers would qualify. And so a lot of this is focused on teachers in the early years of their careers. Young people who are, as I understand the issue, as it's explained to me by education professionals, you often have teachers, people who study, they have a passion for education, they have a passion for young people, they go in and become teaching and they get burned out after a year or two. And they're living 2 hours away from where they're working, they're not making enough money, they can't find a decent place to live, and so they end up leaving. And so that's very disruptive to the school and ends up costing them money. And so a lot of this is about, I think, the recruitment and retention, particularly of teachers at the beginning points of their career. And again, also, these are the kind of things that would apply to a police officer, to a firefighter, folks that in some very expensive neighborhoods in our state, would be making less than 80% of area median income. So very much, it could go to other employees of the district, depending on their income. You could see a counselor or a school nurse or somebody else who might be able to get into one of these buildings depending on their income. But again, this is an amendment to the Teacher Housing Act, which is focused on housing for teachers.
Last one for me, and I'm sorry I have to approach it, but I want to get rid of this particular rumor that I'm hearing around and give you a chance to put this one to rest. It has to do with your wife, which is unfair when people start poking at relatives in this. But she is a land use attorney, as I understand it, and she does do low income and tax credit developments and tax credit equity investments on things. It appears that given the fact that this bill is going to allow for there to be tax credit development there, that this is just ripe for her to be jumping into and for her law firm to be jumping into, which probably could potentially develop some kind of conflict of interest with you having passed the bill on that. What say you on that particular issue, and that there's no conflict that's there, and that's being monitored in some fashion to make sure that this is not just a bill to get some relative rich by some means?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I'll say a couple of things. First of all, I am extraordinarily proud of my wife. She is the most wonderful woman in the world, and I hope you all get it. For those of you that haven't met her, I hope you get a chance to meet her, because she's just a wonderful person. She has devoted her career to issues of housing. Worked at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division in the housing section. Is very committed to helping veterans and seniors and folks get into housing. And so she is someone who works in that industry. I've made that very clear. That was on all of my campaign literature. If you go on my biography, you'll see that on my official biography, you'll see that my wife works in affordable housing, and this is an issue that she cares passionately about. And it was an issue that I ran on. I ran on the issue of housing and homelessness. It's something I talked about with voters in the San Fernando Valley, and it's something I hear about from voters in the San Fernando Valley all the time. When I was elected, I had very robust conversations with our ethics attorneys in the legislature. I said, this is what my wife does. Do you have concerns about me legislating in this area? It's something I talked about in the campaign. It's something that surveys show is a huge issue for voters in my district, and people talk to me about it all the time. And they delineated some very clear ethical guidelines for me. And they said things that are broad legislation that apply statewide that seek to address issues of housing affordability and homelessness are absolutely kosher. If you were to get involved in a specific project she was working on, that would be inappropriate. But as long as you're addressing the issue writ large, then that's fine. Now, again, my mom is a nurse, my grandma was a small businesswoman. I have all kinds of people in my family that are employed in different professions, but I'm not going to not work on healthcare as an issue because my mom was a nurse, right? I mean, these are issues that are important to the district and are important to people in our community, and I need to continue to work on them. That having been said, again, this was such a minor clarification of state law. Had I not passed this bill, the exact same statutory regulations would be in place, because that's the most recent interpretation from the administration of the prior law, nothing would be different. All this does is avoid some confusion that is slowing down the financing process for affordable housing around the state. So I don't.
And that was the federal tax credit issue.
Correct. So again, I understand. I know that there's deep skepticism about government. I think some of it is warranted, especially as I've seen the insides of government. But this is something I've been completely transparent about. I think it's an important issue. I think if as many of you know, I'm sure if you talk to your neighbors, I hear from people all the time about issues of homelessness and housing and housing affordability. And I think it's an enormous crisis facing the state. It's something I've heard about, frankly, in ways that have really concerned me. McKinsey company, a very big consulting company, said we in the state lose in excess of 4% of our GDP every year because of our housing affordability crisis. I've had, in fact, was talking to some business owners today who run a business in the Valley in my district who were saying that they're considering leaving, in part because of our taxes and our regulatory structure, and in part because of the cost of housing. So I think these are real issues facing our state, and something that I hope to continue to work on.
Some of them, I appreciate that. I think I heard enough of me. I've been trying to give a little bit of a background on overall subject so that maybe we get some other questions. And Aaron, you can unmute yourself. You've got some questions for us that's coming in that you can give to the Assembly member.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And there are also a few attendee questions I could ask if no one else has any questions on the board. But Assembly member, hello. And I just want to say I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by saying I was watching the legislation session the day you made your opening statement prayer and mentioned your father's illness. So I really do hope, not to get into it, but I really do hope that he's doing better. So I pass along my best wishes to him on that.
Thank you, Aaron. That means a lot.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So in regards to 1120, I just wanted to get into real quick that, we tried, the vote was sort of delayed every day, right? Towards the end of the session. And we tried to get time with you, who did, but we couldn't, but we were able to get on with your legislative director. But, he was playing it very close to the vest, and he basically said, you hadn't decided on how to vote yet. So for us, it was frustrating not to know how you were going to vote. But as you know, that did not pass on a technicality, right? It did pass, but it didn't pass because of the deadline. So it will be back. So what are you and the other SoCal block? I mean, the reason it did not pass was because of Southern California Assembly members not voting for it. So, what are you going to do, and the other members going to do to fight back and push back against the legislators, mostly in the Bay Area, so that it doesn't get the traction again that is going to pass next session?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for the comments about my dad. I appreciate that. And also let me extend my apologies that we weren't able to get on the phone in advance of that vote. One of the things that I sometimes ask people when I'm explaining to them peeking behind the curtain in Sacramento is to guess how many votes I take in an average 2-year session. And people will say 50, 100, 500. The answer is over 6,000. The volume of bills in front of the legislature is just overwhelming. And unfortunately this year, because of COVID and other things, it all really got pushed to the last minute. And I think we counted, as I went up there for the final week of session, we had several hundred active bills that we were trying to work their way through. And so my team, who works really hard, they will be very reticent to give, to tell the public how I'm going to vote on something if I haven't had a conversation with them about it yet. And so we try to triage that because, every day we'll get a list. These are the 100 bills that are coming up tomorrow. These are the 50 bills that are coming up tomorrow. And we will do our best to work through them in a thoughtful way. And it's, frustrating for me as an attorney who likes to get into the details and really understand the nuances, all of this. So I'm sure my legislative director was just trying to not get out ahead of me and say how I was going to vote before he had an opportunity to talk to me about the bill.
He's a good deputy that he was playing close to the vest for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, because, and I apologize, and it's equally frustrating for us. What I can promise you is that your opposition to that bill was very, very clearly conveyed to me. And Abram on my team did that and noted, and again, it wasn't only the WHO, it was the Encino Property Owners Association and the Tarzana Property Owners Association and Sherman Oaks and others. And so I understood very clearly where different folks on my district, in my district, stood on that bill. And I wish, circumstances permitting, that we could have had an in-person conversation. It's just the volume can be just totally overwhelming at the end of a legislative session. Look, I'll be honest with you. I know it's probably not what you want to hear. I think that bill has a good chance of passing next year. So it was introduced by Senator Toni Atkins from San Diego. She's the president of the Senate. She is a very powerful force in Sacramento. As you noted, that bill did not pass on a technicality. It passed the Senate. It was then amended in the Assembly. It just squeaked over the line in the Assembly. So it passed both houses, but the rule is that the language has to be identical, right? And so it needed to go back to the Senate to get what's called a concurrence vote for them to agree on the amendments and then go to the governor. That needed to happen before midnight. There was a little bit of chaos in the legislature the final night. And so it just, the shot clock ran out, for lack of a better explanation, on that bill. And so that's why it didn't go. But I suspect, I've not talked to her, that the pro tem is probably going to try to run that bill again. And I think the best bet for those of us that thought that bill went too far is to try to amend it, is to try to change it, to try to make it more workable for some of the communities that we represent. And again, the interesting dynamic about Sacramento that I think sometimes gets missed by folks who aren't there is a lot of my colleagues are deeply reverent of local control. I took a very unusual path to the legislature. Most of my colleagues are people who served as city council members and then perhaps as county supervisors and then have made their way to the legislature. So the overwhelming majority are people who have spent time in local government, who believe in local government. The same things we say about this doesn't work for the Valley, folks will say this doesn't work for rural California, this doesn't work for Orange County, this doesn't work for San Diego. People understand that this is an extraordinarily diverse state and that oftentimes one size fits all is not the right approach for the state of California. Now, again, that is being balanced by the fact that those of us in office right now are really being receiving a strong message from all of our communities in diverse parts of the state that more needs to be done on the issue of homelessness. And people, I think, regardless of where they live, are seeing homelessness really explode around them. They're unsatisfied with the results that have been delivered by local control. They're unsatisfied by the results that have been delivered by their county or their city. And so they're coming to their legislators and saying, we need you. I need you to get more involved in this, to help point the city and the county in a better direction. So I've tried to do that through the accountability legislation that I introduced. But that dynamic of members of the legislature really having their constituents demand that the legislature do more on housing and homelessness issues is what's driving this. And so, I've had this conversation with folks in Encino and Calabasas and Tarzana. I think we need to be smart and thoughtful about how we approach these issues. And I think we can get it right. I think there are ways to help address homelessness and for the state to play a constructive role and also respect issues of local control. I mean, I certainly, I don't want someone in Sacramento who couldn't find Woodland Hills on a map who are telling me, what goes where on Ventura Boulevard. I mean, that's just crazy.
I think it's an almost an easy fix from our standpoint, and for you too, is to carve out our areas. And you can do it by just a simple one. Those that have got a specific plan in a particular area, the bill doesn't apply to that. That keeps the local control there. It may even get some other areas to develop those specific findings too, for specific rules for their areas. We've got that specific plan for Woodland Hills and the Warner Center. It's working out nicely. If you carve out some of those things and take that position of going, listen, we understand there's some places in the state that need this type of help, that need to be able to have, where people haven't been behaving, let's go ahead and get those things built. But to allow the developers to come in and take it away from any kind of oversight whatsoever, they can build whatever they want to, that the single family homes can be basically destroyed, and you have 4 apartments in the middle of a neighborhood now, just doesn't work for us, especially when we've been working very hard to come up with that. So we want to impress upon you, there are some abilities to do carve-outs that might end up making this thing work a little bit better.
John,
yes.
John, can I add in on this? This is Marty Lipkin, I'm a board member. One of the big problems, Assemblyman Gabriel, is the fact that nobody's had the guts in the Senate or the Assembly to raise their head and speak out on this garbage from Scott, whatever it begins with a W. I can't remember his last name.
Wiener.
Yeah, I mean, they're idiotic bills, quite frankly. And nobody's had the guts in either the Assembly or the Senate to raise up in public and say, no, it's got to stop. No more of this crap. Quit trying to run every city from Sacramento. There's not one of you guys that has stood up and proclaimed this is a bad idea. All the rest of you Assembly members and all the rest of you senators need to wake up. And I don't give a damn about what Tony Atkins has to say, because she ain't living in LA.
Yeah,
And stop the foolishness. You guys have no profile. You're operating behind a curtain, and nobody knows that anybody is against the stuff.
okay, Marty, let's see if he's willing to stand up at this point. And that's one of the problems we have with the basically the no vote issue, as opposed to stand up saying, you know, listen, I'm against this. It doesn't work for us here. And we realize there's a political aspect to that. But are you willing to do something to try to make sure this isn't going to go through, or if there's at least some kind of a carve out? We need to have something, some kind of help here. I mean, who else do we turn to if it's not to you to be able to protect our community?
Yeah, I just would say, Marty, with all due respect, I'd just direct you to watch the floor debate on this bill. Go back and watch it from the Assembly. It's publicly available, and you see that there was a robust and fierce debate. There was vociferous opposition to this bill from multiple members of the legislature from different parts of the state. So, you know, I just think what you're saying doesn't comport with what I observed when I was there. The debate was fierce. And again, remember, his signature bill, SB 50, Senator Wiener could not even get that out of his own house. His signature bill was defeated in the state Senate, and people like Senator Hertzberg stood up and made impassioned floor speeches telling him that that was the wrong thing to do. I saw Senator Hertzberg on the flight up to Sacramento the day before that bill was coming up for a vote, and he told me he had been practicing his floor speech against that bill all weekend. So maybe that's not being covered in the LA Times, maybe that's not being reported, but I would just encourage you to go watch the debate that occurred in the state legislature, and you will see, how.
But nobody's getting that.
Marty, hold on. 1120 was almost had the same basic approach to it, and that's a whole different ballgame. There was overwhelming support that was going on for 1120 until the city came into that whole thing, and again, it just got nicked out on a technicality a couple of minutes before it all expired. So we really need to have somebody here that needs to be able to help us on this one. Shelley, I see you have your hand up too. You got a question that you want to jump in on? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Assemblyman Gabriel, for discussing with John and I about AB 3308. But I think I'm going to head back to that bill because it does tie, after what I listened to with LAUSD tonight, to 1120. They made it very clear tonight on the LAUSD Zoom meeting that your bill, AB 3308, is what is allowing them to move forward with attempting to build on 10 of the properties. Now, I know Mr. Melvoin may say, I doubt anything's going to be built, but if that was the case, LAUSD is a huge landowner. They specifically put on their list Oso, Collins, and Highlander. And I listened to Mr. Melvoin at the school board meeting, and he was the staunchest supporter of using those properties for development. And one of the things that came up tonight is you said, well, there wasn't much pushback, but part of your district has 5 properties that are unused school properties that are now on the chopping block in these neighborhoods for high density housing, because LAUSD is saying, well, we're not going to develop it, but we're going to trade it. We're going to exchange it to a developer. And then it's up to that developer to build whatever the city will allow him. And that ties right into losing local control, because right now, if a developer says, I want to build affordable housing, they get density bonuses. They don't have height restrictions. They'll sail through the rezoning of these properties that are in single family neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods are going to end up with high density affordable housing right in the middle of them. And the guy at LAUSD flatly said, and that's Nick and Mr. Melvoin too, said, it's not our problem once we exchange those properties. It's not our problem. It's the community's problem to deal with the city, the state, the assembly on what's allowed. So this really ties your bills, AB 3308, to really potentially making a significant damage to your district and the neighborhoods in your district, and the issue of 1120 coming back on and just allowing single family neighborhoods to no longer exist?
Yeah, I guess what I would say to that, and I appreciate the engagement, is I'd have to go back and watch what the board member said. That's not consistent with what he said to me. So if that's what he's saying, that's different than the conversation we had. What he said, and to be clear, what he didn't say to me is that we're not going to look to build affordable housing. He said we're not going to build affordable housing on those properties. He said where he thought it would be appropriate is near downtown. I think they have their eye on some property near downtown where they want to build affordable housing. And what he did suggest to me is that the district would look to potentially swap out those properties. I think what he mentioned to me was that they would either look at a performing arts center for students on one of them, or that they would sell those properties because they're unused, and then use the proceeds from that to go build affordable housing downtown. Now, again, the district can do that right now, right? The district could go and sell those properties right now. Those are public assets that the district manages for the benefit of the community. And so if the district wanted to sell those assets right now, the district could do that. My bill has zero impact on that. And as you mentioned, all of that, whatever is developed on there, will go through the local land use and planning process. You can go talk to Councilmember Blumenfield. You can talk to folks on the Planning Commission. That will go through the normal process. But there's nothing my bill does that impacts that. Now, maybe my bill will make it allow LAUSD to slightly faster develop its affordable housing downtown, but it won't impact in one way or another at all, what you've just described with the properties in our district.
Aaron, if you got some more questions from the audience out here, you can unmute yourself.
Got it. Okay, thanks. I did just want to say one more quick thing before I ask just the few. There's just only a few questions from the audience, and then as I do want to get back to homelessness a little bit. Obviously, that's a huge problem all over the state. But what I do hear a lot from you when I've heard you speak about the subject is housing, and more housing. What I don't hear from you and a lot of our other legislators, you're certainly not alone, is that there's a mental health crisis, there's a drug addiction crisis that never gets mentioned by our elected officials. We only hear housing. So what is going on in terms to deal with those issues, which, for most of us, obviously, we're upset when we see the encampments build up on our streets, right? No one, and when we see that, we understand those are the people with mental health issues and or drug addictions, which lead to mental health issues. Those are the ones that people feel housing is not going to help. So what can we do and what's being done in Sacramento to deal with that issue?
It's a great question, Aaron, and I actually very strongly agree with you. I think one of the reasons that the issue of homelessness is challenging is because people are homeless for different reasons, and each of those require a different response, right? As you mentioned, there are people that are homeless for economic reasons, but there are also people who are homeless because of mental illness. There are people who are homeless because of substance abuse and drug addiction issues. Oftentimes, they are self-medicating for mental illness, and those require real interventions. And I will tell you, I've had really pretty robust conversations with this about some of our local law enforcement. One of the things I try to do to get a straight perspective on this is, go talk to the LAPD guys or the CHP guys who work on some of the underpasses, just say, tell me, what do you guys see? Tell me what you think. What do you observe? And they will, talk about the fact that, they see women who become homeless because of domestic violence. They're, terribly afraid of sexual assault. And so they'll start taking methamphetamines to stay up at night to protect themselves. And then they become terribly addicted, and they need a lot more than housing, right? Those are folks that need a different intervention. So I've looked at some issues related to conservatorships to help people who have lost the ability to take care of themselves. Unfortunately, there's been strong opposition from the ACLU and other groups to that. There are some constitutional and legal limitations that are what they are. But I don't think it's compassionate to allow people who are suffering from severe mental illness or substance abuse order to sit there on the street. I actually think that's the opposite, that's deeply uncompassionate. So that's one area where the legislature's looked. And this issue actually came up, Aaron, in my conversation with the governor's office 2 weeks ago. And we talked about, are there ways to potentially work on some of directing more state funding, expanding the applicability of certain programs to address this issue. Because I agree very, very strongly with you. Housing is an important piece of addressing the homelessness issue, but the data also shows us that mental illness and substance abuse are big issues. And as some of you may have known, I actually think there's been an effort to downplay that. Some of you may remember that there was the homeless count, which said that a very small percentage of the people who were homeless had substance abuse and mental health issues. And the LA Times went back and independently audited that and recounted and said, actually, it's a much larger percentage than what they're saying. I think there are some folks who for political reasons were trying to, shape that data. But I agree with you. I think that that's an important issue. There are real constitutional limitations to what we can do on some of this. The ACLU will take us to court. They will win. As I think the city has been forced into some settlements with folks who filed lawsuits. So we are trying to be thoughtful about how we can get at those issues, compassionately help those folks, bring them out of addiction, help them with their mental illness, treat them humanely and compassionately, and ultimately bring them off the street. So I think it's a great point and something that we're looking into and talking to the governor's office about.
Okay, thank you. John, you want to say something? I could ask some of the audience questions if you want.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, so no, I have not pre-read these, so I apologize. I was listening to your answer, so I'm just reading these as I see them. Are you concerned with the militant nature of the radical left, such as protesting outside your home? I hope that hasn't happened to you, but maybe. I know it has happened to some of our Bob Blumenfield, for example, and others.
I have had them outside my home. Unfortunately, when I was not home, when it was only my wife and the babies, it is not a pleasant experience. Look, I think I think our politics has taken a turn that is really concerning to me. I think we've lost the ability to have conversations with each other, and that's something that's distressing to me. As some of you may know, I have tried very hard to operate in a bipartisan fashion in Sacramento. I'm really proud of the fact that every single bill that I passed in the legislature with one has been bipartisan. And not because I've needed to. I mean, Democrats have a supermajority. I could have passed those bills without any Republican support, but I think that hearing from other people who disagree with you, incorporating their feedback, listening to them, and ultimately earning their support is an important part of the legislative process. And so I'm proud that I have strong relationships with some very progressive Democrats and some very conservative Republicans, and I've worked with some very conservative Republicans on issues where we can find common ground. And I'm really proud of the bipartisan work that we've done. And I'm hopeful that I think the entire country would be well served to kind of turn down the partisan dial a little bit. I think what people in the Valley sent me to do is to find solutions to problems and not to score political points or demonize anybody. And so, I'm going to continue, and maybe some folks will protest me for it. But I'm going to continue to try to operate in a bipartisan fashion because I think that's the best way to get things done that really serve the greatest number of folks.
Okay, I think we probably answered this one. Is there any consideration to dealing with the mental health issues facing our communities? I don't know if you probably feel like you answered that or if you want to go more into that.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is beyond the homelessness thing. We have a real mental health crisis in this country. It's touched a lot of families in our community, and so I've tried to work on that issue through a variety of ways, primarily through education. I had a bill that I worked on this past session to try to help some mental health referral protocols in our public schools. I heard from tons of parents about the concerns about mental health issues with their children. I think some of this is due to social media, some of this is due to some of the other pressures that young people face right now. And unfortunately, that bill didn't make it all the way through the process, but trying to address the issue that way. And then also we have a mental health crisis on our college campuses. Interestingly to me, in conversations I've had both with the chancellor at UCLA and with the old president at CSUN, mental health was one of the first things that they brought up. There is a severe mental health crisis among young people on our college campuses right now, and so we have done some work to bring pre-existing resources to the attention of students to help them get some of the help that they need because this is a real crisis in our communities, and we're trying to do it in thoughtful, bipartisan, cost-effective ways to address this issue, because it is when you look at the data, it is truly terrifying about how many people in our community are struggling with mental health issues.
Okay. Some of these are comments, so if you want to address any of them, just chime in and I'll let you address them. But I'll just read some of these comments. They're a little all over the place. Are you aware that El Camino in Woodland Hills wanted the sites, the vacant school sites, I suppose, but LAUSD refused to sell the sites to a charter. El Camino would provide school on the sites. So that was one comment.
I'm going to guess that came from Scott Silverstein. It's just a random guess, even though it says anonymous.
It does say anonymous. Yeah, you can see that. It says anonymous.
it says anonymous, but I have a strong suspicion it was my friend Scott. Yeah, again, this is. I will just say there have, as all of you know, there's, unfortunately, warfare at the school board between those who support and oppose charter schools, and I don't think that that has served our community well. And again, these are decisions that are made locally by the school board, but I really, I think we all ought to encourage them to try to put aside some of those differences and work together. And some of you who have lived through these school board races know that they can get extraordinarily nasty, right? They turn into proxy fights between the teachers union and charter schools, and I don't think anybody is served well by those fights. I think that's hopefully something that we can put behind us. There was a rather sort of a consensus bill that the legislature passed last year to try to make some progress on this issue, but I just hope my colleagues, or not my colleagues, but my counterparts on the school board can try to see past that and just really try to do what's right for children and do what's right for the communities that they serve.
Okay, I could go on. Marty, did you want to ask a question? Your hand is raised.
Well, I'd like to ask Assemblyman Gabriel about the homeless issue because it raised its head today in the LA Times editorial page as the main editorial. I would hope he's familiar with what Councilman Blumenfeld has done, and which is to introduce a motion in front of the council. They haven't voted on it yet. They keep putting it off, about clearing the people out from, working with Judge Carter, clearing the people out from under the freeway overpasses, and with the judge's blessing. And he's been the point man on this whole issue for California, frankly. And Blumenfeld has met tremendous opposition for even introducing that, for trying to take the first step, because that seems to be the big problem. Nobody is either willing or has the guts to take the first step to try to fix it. May not be the best step, but at least it's a step forward. And everybody, backed by the LA Times editorial today, says, no, you shouldn't do anything. Just let them there. Why? You don't have the right to do that. You said that, Assemblyman, you said that the folks up in Sacramento are tired of hearing or getting assaulted with a lot of comments about the locals seem to be doing anything. What do you recommend that the cities do? How do you recommend that they handle this? Because everybody's like, oh, don't touch them, leave them, don't upset the apple cart. Maybe you have some ideas, and if you do, I'd like you to share them.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. I'll confess I haven't read the editorial from today's Times, but I'll be sure to look it up. A couple of things. One is, again, the dynamic is, I think, members of the legislature from all over the state really feel like their constituents are demanding that they do something. And so we're trying to balance, again, how do we address this issue and respect local control? Because as you know, this issue is playing out through the city council, that they're the local body that is making these decisions. What I have tried to focus on are a couple of things that I think are informed by data and research that could help to make a difference on the issue of homelessness. So one, as I mentioned, that the homeless count, the most recent homeless count from earlier this year, pre-COVID, said there are 66,000 homeless people in the county of Los Angeles. On average, on every given day, the county houses about 207 people. They take 207 people off the street and put them into housing. On average, that same day, 227 people become homeless. So 2/3 of those for the first time. So literally every day we are going backwards, right? More people are becoming homeless than we are lifting out of homelessness. So for me, you know, and based on the conversations with some policy experts I've had, is part of what we need to do is try to work to prevent homelessness in the first place. We need to do more to bring people off the streets. And that again is part of the accountability stuff that I've worked on. But we also need to think about how do we prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place? And there are actually some targeted interventions that can make a big difference there. And I think that's both important from a humane perspective to help people who are right on the cusp. And it also makes a lot of sense financially. The amount of resources that are required to help somebody when they become homeless and lift them out of homelessness are extraordinary relative to some very targeted investments that you could make to help people who maybe are right on the bubble because of a medical emergency or something else that might push them into homelessness. So I've tried to get the state to focus on the issue of homelessness prevention, primarily through market-driven means. There is a bill that I introduced last year that had very broad support from across the political spectrum, again, very conservative folks and very progressive folks on affordable housing preservation. And that was an idea that, you know, we're going to lose, unfortunately, in the state, something like 35,000 units over the next couple of years, which would have catastrophic consequences for homelessness. And there are some ways for really at a bargain to preserve affordable housing rather than building new housing at $850,000 a door. So, you know, that was a bill that unfortunately we had to push pause on with COVID. It didn't go through the process, but it was actually the LA Times editorial board mentioned it as a way to address the issue. And then to try to bring more accountability and transparency and a focus on data to the issue. I think we are shoveling money at the problem without a clear understanding of what's working and what's not. And I think that is not the way to do policymaking. And we actually, I got into it a little bit with some folks this morning on the LA County delegation call. There were some folks who were making a presentation, not members of the delegation, who were asking for us to raise taxes, to put more money into homelessness, and to just give that money to the cities and the counties. And I said to them, I said, with all due respect, people in my community, a lot of them voted twice already to tax themselves, right? They've literally come to government and said, take more of my money and go solve this problem. Help these poor people who are on the streets in my community. Do something that is going to improve the quality of life in my community. Please address this problem. And yet every day that problem is getting worse in the county of Los Angeles. And the truth is, which is really unfortunate, is I don't think people have a good understanding of what interventions are working and what interventions are not. And they are spending your money and my money in a way that they have no idea what's effective. And I find that notion to be offensive. And so that is why I'm trying to bring more accountability to this, to make people prove that they are spending our money in a way that's efficient, and to glean things from the data that are helpful. Right? I mean, this is what the most successful companies in the private sector do. They use data to understand what works and what doesn't. And I don't understand why we don't want to understand, you know, what programs are out there that will help people and what programs aren't, and what programs are worth more investment and what programs should be scaled back. So again, respecting the fact that counties and cities and locals have the lead here on homelessness, and that's how local control works. I think there's an important role for the city, for the state to come in and say, you know, we are going to start to tie funding to proven results. We are going to ask you to demonstrate that you are using taxpayer resources in a way that's effective, that's addressing this issue. And what I would propose is, if you are out there doing things that work, we as a state will come in and help you. We will give you additional resources. But if you're not, then there need to be some consequences to that as well, because we can't just give away money to local governments and watch the problem get worse. So again, it's, as Aaron pointed out, it's an extraordinarily complex issue. The closer I get to it, the more I realize that there are really challenging nuances to all of this. There's a mental health issue, there's an addiction issue, there is a domestic violence issue. There are lots of things that lead into the homelessness issue. But I think that the current approach is not working. And the worst thing that you can do is maintain the status quo when it's not working. And so that's why I think that there is an appropriate role for the legislature, both to focus people more on the issue of homelessness prevention, which is what the data tells us is a real issue, and to try to bring accountability and transparency and data-driven approach to this. And that's what I've tried to do. Now, I will, Marty. I wrote an op-ed that was published in the Daily News earlier this year about some of the bills I was working on. It mentions the Affordable Housing Preservation Bill. It also mentions a bill that I had signed into law last year that was based on some research around helping people to move in who are about to become homeless to move in with friends and relatives and other things to keep them off the street. So if you just Google Jesse Gabriel homelessness, you can find the Daily News op-ed I wrote, and that'll give you a little bit more of color on some of my ideas about how the state can play a constructive role here.
Marty, we're just about run out of time. Your hand is still up. Did you have another question, or Shelley? Either one of you? You okay?
There's another attendee question if you want, John, I can get to. It's kind of a hot topic.
Running out of time here. Let's go.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick, but it's a hot topic issue. What is your position on the defunding of the police? And before you answer, I know a lot of politicians will answer, well, that's not really, they say that, but that's not really what they mean. But from what I've seen, there's many out there that really do mean defund the police. So just what is your position on that?
No, I think that there was I think that there was a strong sense from this past election that that's not what people want. My sense and what I believe and what I think is appropriate is that we need to reform some police practices. I think that that's what what we saw with George Floyd this summer was horrific, and I think that there are some meaningful changes, and I think that there are folks in law enforcement who agree. And I was, I co-authored a bill in Sacramento to ban the use of the chokehold. And to do some other things that I think folks think were long overdue. But I believe that we need real reforms to some of these issues. But the idea that we're not gonna have a police department, I don't know. I mean, I don't see that as a real a solution to anything.
Shelley, any questions from you? I see the hand still up. No. Okay, very good. Well, I think we're bringing ourselves to a close at this point, Assembly Member. First of all, we really thank you for spending time with us tonight. That's extraordinary. We'd like for you to consider getting together a lot more often in the community out here. I would suggest that if you get Henry Stern together and yourself and Bob Bloomingfield and maybe get the neighborhood councils and homeowners together, maybe every quarter, just do a Zoom meeting for a couple hours and find out what the issues are, what things have been changing, what you've been running into, what have you. I think might be helpful from both sides, both us to find out things are going on, as well as you finding out some things that might be popping up in our communities too at that point. Encourage you for that as well. Also, would hope that you take a look at the LA Unified School District fees and hope that you can find a way legislatively to keep those here in our district. We're spending a lot of money out of the development that's come in and out here, and all of the people who are doing those developments would love to be able to have those schools built out here with those monies rather than going back downtown and being used for other purposes. So I'd like to thank you for your support of our community. And you had something. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. You had something.
Oh, and I'm sorry. And I see that Dennis said that his hand was raised too. I don't want to. I'm on your time, so I can stay. I did just want to say one more thing.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead.
Well, so first, first thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you and to listen to all of you. And I will say one of the things that's been very challenging about doing this job in the time of COVID is normally I try to be out and about in the community as much as possible, and to go to neighborhood council meetings and to go meet with groups and listen to folks and see them at events and invite them to meetings in my office. And it's just, this has been a challenging time, and I'm glad that we're finding a way to do this virtually. But please reach out. I am very eager for feedback, for thoughts, for guidance. I know people in politics are supposed to pretend that they have all the answers and they have everything figured out, and I will say that I don't. And I will also say that some of the best advice I got when I first decided to get into this from a mentor of mine was, who is not a politician and not involved in politics, said, the best thing you can do is listen. That there's a lot of people in politics that like to talk, but they don't do enough listening. And so, I've tried to commit myself to being a listener, and I hope that we can continue this conversation. I hope this is just the beginning. I hope we can make it a regular thing. And I just want to invite you all to reach out and to be in touch with us. And Jeremy, my field rep, maybe he can put the email address and phone number for our office in the chat so that all of you can have it. I also just wanted to if I might, Dennis, offer a shameless plug for our holiday toy drive, which is coming up on the 10th. Normally one of my favorite events is to we have a holiday open house where we invite members of the community to come to talk to us, to enjoy some refreshments. And we always try to, collect some collect some items for the needy in our community. This year we can't really do the open house part of it, but we are working with the West Valley Food Pantry to do a contactless toy drive. So if you are so inclined to support families in our community, you can literally drive through. It's at the Prince of Peace Church. Roll down your window and drop off some toys, and the West Valley Food Pantry is going to work to make sure that there's some kids in our community who have a Christmas or a Hanukkah that has a little bit of joy to it. So just wanted to invite you all to do all that. But really hope you all stay safe and healthy, and I hope as the world starts to get back to normal, we can do this in person, and I can come see you in person, and we'll really look forward to that opportunity.
We look forward to that as well. And again, we thank you for the work that you've done in our community, and continue on with that. And listen, we appreciate everything that's being done to make us a better place to live in and to work and to play. That's for darn sure. For the rest of there, just a reminder to you that we're going to have the next meetings on January the 20th. We're hoping to have Councilman Bob Bloomingfield with us at that time. Since the next one's not until after the first year, I'll wish everybody happy holidays. Everybody be safe. Wishing all of you a happy new year. We thank you all so much for participating, and deeply, deeply appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you after the first of the year as well. Be safe, be happy, enjoy your family, enjoy things that are going on. Again, Jesse, thank you so much. We'll talk.
Thank you for having me. Stay safe, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John?
Yes.
There were two hands raised in the attendees.
I think those questions were answered, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of.
Okay, fine. I just didn't know if anybody had seen them. Yeah.
Well, let's double check here if you want to double check.
My kids went to bed, and all I have waiting for me is a sink full of dishes. So I'm
No, I see hands up for.
I can stay if you need me.
I see hands up for Janice.
Janice, I see that your hand was up over there. Are you still online? And if you are, you can unmute yourself.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Dennis, I can hear you.
Okay. So Jesse, I just had a quick question. It did have to, going back to the mental health issue. I've had some personal experience with some family members of witnessing the actual system of the health system, and it seems antiquated and it seems undersized. And I can't imagine a person that's out in the street that's been through that system actually volunteering to go through that system again. And is there anything at the state level that can be done to return the health system back to the point where it actually is workable?
You're talking specifically, Dennis, about mental health care?
Yeah, mental health, yes.
It's a great question. I will tell you, the primary the lead, the counties take the lead on mental health. So that's under the jurisdiction of the counties. It has been a topic of conversation in Sacramento. There are always proposals to reform it and look at it better. And we had a very interesting presentation today at our LA County delegation. So the way it worked, they called for any of you are familiar with Shark Tank. We had people come and sort of pitch us Shark Tank style on various proposals that we could work on. And one of the presentations was from a gentleman from Los Angeles who had, suffered some mental health issues, and he was a very successful executive, and then had some episodes and had interaction with the system, and ended up being homeless, and has since managed to put his life back together. And so he had some thoughts for us about the system and its shortfalls, and I think a lot of people agree with you that there's real work that needs to be done. I will say, this is something I'm still learning about. I didn't have a lot of personal expertise with it before I was elected to the legislature, but I do think that it's something that folks in Sacramento have their eye on and are thinking about. How do we work with the counties to strengthen the system, to make it more effective, and to help those in our community that are suffering. So I'm happy to try to keep you updated on bills and initiatives and various things that we work on or others work on that topic, if you'd be of interest to you.
Of course. There's always these casual comments that back in the Reagan era, that's when it changed. And I wasn't around then in California, But that gives me the impression that something at the state level changed and could be rescinded or revised. So maybe you want to take a look at that. I don't know what that is, but they always say that it was really the Reagan policies back in the 70s that made things different. So
yeah, and as I understand it, it was the closure of some state mental health hospitals that happened during the Reagan administration. I will confess I was in preschool at that point, so I wasn't following it closely. But you're right. I mean, there are folks that feel like we've really fallen short, and our mental health care system is really not adequate and not helping a lot of folks who need help and not addressing the system in the right way. And there are proposals for reform in Sacramento. So I'd be happy to keep you updated about any of that stuff that progresses this year. I will say this is one of the unfortunate things that happened with COVID, is that there was less attention paid to all of these very important issues, right? They basically decided, with very limited exceptions, that things that were not COVID related, that people had to push pause on them. And then specifically also things that had a price tag associated with it, right? When you find yourself $54 billion in debt and unsure about how you're going to be able to, make payments to schools that are constitutionally required, it sort of forces you to stop working on a lot of other issues if there's a price tag attached. And so, that I think was an unfortunate casualty of COVID in the legislature this year, was a lot of important work on a lot of issues that deserve attention, but just didn't get the attention they deserve in this past legislative session. So I'm really hopeful and eager, as we, God willing, put this pandemic behind us, that we can start to return our focus to some of these other issues that really do deserve our attention.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. I look forward to working with you on that particular one. Thank you.
Absolutely, Dennis. Thank you.
Chris Rowe, did you have a question? I see that
I have a couple of them for just a second, please. Can you hear me?
we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Jesse. And I'd like to privately discuss your father. I didn't know he was ill. I hope he's okay. This is what I want to say. When Jesse, when you have time, look up William Laga, L-A-G-A. He was a student of my husband's when my husband was teaching at Pierce, and he liked my husband very well, so he took many of his classes. And he was, I believe, declared paranoid schizophrenic. And the CBS, I believe, did a major calling it Mondays with William, and he was an artist. And I actually have a painting done by him that he actually offered my husband a painting. What would Chris like? So you need to understand that he was a Pierce student. He was there for decades, but I actually saw him in Westwood. He lived more down in the Westwood area, and he would walk to Pierce and stuff. And I actually saw him digging in the trash decades ago in Westwood. So, but people like William were terrified of being forced into mental health. He literally left home. He didn't want any contact with his parents because his parents would have institutionalized him. So this is one issue. But the second issue that I wanted to bring up, which I posted in my post, is that there was an article, I think, in the LA Times about the state had resources available, stockpiled, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that apparently because of the age of them, whether it was respirators, whether it was PPE or whatever, it was costing the state something like $6 million a year to maintain the stockpile, which Governor Schwarzenegger put aside after the Northridge quake. But then apparently the state got rid of the stockpile. And I would like to see for future issues, whether it's fires, whether it's earthquakes, pandemics, money set aside to rebuild the stockpile, to have that like portable hospital facilities, and to have somebody actually in place that doesn't allow PPE to expire. That's one of the keys. They said it was actually expired. Well, why not rotate it? Rotate it out to the fire department. They can use it for forest fires and and get new PPE in so we don't run out of it in the stockpile. So if that's something you could look into, I would greatly appreciate it. And I do appreciate your staff very much. I will contact them about my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. It's nice to hear your voice. I hope you're doing well. I will just say very quickly on the PPE issue. Yeah, I mean, we faced extraordinary challenges at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, a lot of our effort, frankly, in the first days and weeks was actually working. We had some of the local hospitals here in the West San Fernando Valley reach out to us and say, you know, we're concerned, we need help. And so we worked to try to get some private donations and public resources and deliver that to those hospitals. That was how dire the situation was. You know, and as you all know, I think we all got caught a little flat-footed. The good news that I will share is that the state now has an extremely robust stockpile of PPE. Some of you may have heard the governor actually said this the other day. We have more in our stockpile than the United States of America does, the state of California does, than in the national strategic stockpile. You know, the concerning news to me is that I think we may end up needing a lot of it because we are headed in a really scary direction with the pandemic. But we have a lot of it, and actually they've been stockpiling even more with the anticipation of rolling out the vaccine. So a lot of the work that the state has been doing, assuming a vaccine will be approved, is to make sure that we have enough syringes and surgical gloves and masks and the other things that you will need to, you know, hopefully be able to administer millions of doses of vaccine to people in the state of California. So, you know, this is a question that we have asked both publicly and privately of the administration. I was on a call just two or 3 days ago with members of the legislature and the director of the Department of Public Health, Dr. Galley, and it came up again, and he assured us that they feel very confident about, that the state feels very confident about its stockpile of PPE. So, you know, fingers crossed. We're not going to run through all of it, but I agree with your larger point here, which is, you know, I hope this is going to be a lesson for all of us that we do need to keep stockpiles, because you don't know what's going to happen, whether it's a wildfire or an earthquake or any other type of emergency. And there were actually a number of bills this year looking at how to require both the state and individual hospitals and medical centers to ensure that they had an adequate supply of PPE on hand. So that has certainly you know, been brought to the attention of the legislature and something that folks are focused on. But I think it's an excellent point to raise, and you know, something we're going to keep working on.
Chris, it looks like you had another question. Go ahead.
Yes, please. I am very concerned, and I'm going to call you Jesse. I have been to the doctors. I've been to oncologist's office. I've been to cardiologist's offices. And I believe that what they're being told is not to wear masks with valves. I've written articles on this for City Watch, and I've done a lot of research. And the result is, when you mention surgical masks, I don't believe that the surgical masks were designed to really prevent COVID-19. I think they're inadequate. They're not face fitted. And by the way, I want you to know that my person that I consult with this is retired from the California Department of Health, someone that is very familiar with fit testing for masks. So bottom line is, whether it was when I saw photos of you going out and looking at the Woolsey fire in Bell Canyon area, you should have had a mask on with a valve. And they do tell the doctors that they should not wear a mask with a valve, but the masks with the valves are designed to be worn 24 hours and allow the doctors and nurses to breathe better. So just a regular surgical mask, I believe, is inadequate. And I believe a mask with a valve with the second surgical mask on top of that will allow them to breathe better, or we should be doing studies on that. And I brought that to the attention of even a surgeon, because I felt that he didn't have adequate protection during surgery. And these are at major medical facilities. And the idea that they are having to reuse, rewear, and disinfect, these masks are not designed to be disinfected, especially the ones with the valves. And again, I get my research from the CDC and from the professionals. This is not something coming from Chris Rowe. I've got a source for everything that I say to you.
I know you do, and your emails to our office are always well sourced, so I applaud you for that. You know, look, I'm a little bit outside of my expertise here. Part of the reason I became a lawyer was so I wouldn't have to deal with math and science again. So you know, this is not my area of expertise. But I will tell you, it was, I think, part of the reason that folks were in surgical masks and not N95 or KN95 respirators was just that there was a severe shortage of them. And this was, you know, sort of vividly illustrated for me. Some of you may know we had our third son, Noah, on November 13th, which was the peak of the first wave. And so it was a very, April 13th, excuse me, really just a sort of terrifying experience to go in and you know, at the peak of all this, and thank God my wife and the baby were great, but we actually had on hand from you know, my mom, after the last set of fires, had bought some N95s, and we had a few in our house, and we decided to bring them into the hospital because they could use them better than we could. But it was really jarring to see, you know, to be there in the delivery room and to see all of the medical professionals without the N95 masks. And you know, again, I think it was just unfortunately that we were caught flat-footed and there wasn't enough, there weren't adequate supplies. And you know, I'm hopeful that you know, we've learned our lesson and that won't happen again.
Well, all good. I think that we're going to have to close it off at this point. It's starting to get pretty late at this stage for things on it. Again, Jesse, thank you for staying around and answering some additional questions. Deeply, deeply appreciated. We look forward to really, truly working with you as time goes on here. Prayers to your father, prayers to your family as well. But for all of us, let's please stay healthy and let's get through all this stuff as best we possibly can. Again, happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year. And we will talk again for next year. And thank you again so much. Have a blessed night.